my children, and I didn't really expect to be here. I moved away for 8 years, but then I'm back. And when my last child left the house before I moved, I said, okay, I know you're going off to the university, so what am I going to do? I said, okay, I'm going to see the world. And I've lived in 4 continents, and with a backpack, I just traveled the world. I lived in Europe, Asia, Africa, and North America. And I lived with families. I'm an old flower child, you know. I like to say I'm old hippie, and I loved it. So here we go. This is I wrote this poem. I wrote this, and it started out as just a let's see, what is a little? It was just a quote. It started out as a quote. And then it turned into a song. My kids used to always say, Mom, stop singing. And so it turned into a song, and then I sat down to write the song, and it became a poem. And then it became a story. And so hopefully one day it'll be a play. And the name of it is They Broke Up the Village. Okay, here we go. Good day, my children. How y'all doing? Come on over here. I want to talk to you all. I've watched you walk past all summer long as I sit here on the porch tending to my flower garden. You remember me. I'm that old lady that greets you with a friendly wave. Well, now I'm going to tell you a story. Have a sit down and make yourself comfortable. I prepare for you plenty of food and drink right over yonder on the table. Help yourselves. Eat all you need and save the rest to share. I've noticed many times you walk past, you seem to be angry. One day I overheard you say how angry you were, but you didn't know why you were so angry. It is for this reason I have called upon you today, for it is time to hear the facts about your anger through this story. Now rest assured, my children, I'm going to tell you why you're so angry and where your anger comes from. I'm going to walk you through the path from whence your anger comes. All I ask of you is to never forget this story and continue to repeat this story to all your family members. Now listen me and listen closely to this story. Once upon a time, long ago, in a far away land, there was a place called Africa. This was when the drums come in. A land with many villages. You see, my children, villages were the way of life for African people. The village people did everything together. They worked together, hunted, gathered food, raised children, cooked, ate, drank, and celebrated together. The village provided protection, a safe haven, you see, a place where village families depended upon one another. There were celebrations of drumming, dancing, singing, eating, drinking, and plenty of laughter and happiness as they marked the rites of passage. That's the growing stages of life, you see, for each and every person in the village at their appropriate age and time. The village people were very knowledgeable, happy, and content until one day the strangers came. Strangers from a faraway land who didn't look like the village people. But that didn't matter, for the village people were a kind people and happy to welcome the strangers into their villages. The village people provided these strangers with comfortable places to stay, plenty of food and drink, and even welcomed them to celebrate in village ceremonies with all the village peoples. And for a while, it seemed the strangers had become friends. Friends to the village people. But soon, the strangers began demanding. You see, my children, demanding was not part of the village culture. The village people were being challenged by these strangers' demands, and the people of the village were not prepared for such a mean-spirited exchange, nor for what was soon to come, weapons. Not the weapons like the village people used to hunt for food. The strangers' weapons were different and most powerful. These weapons were weapons of mass destruction, and they broke up the village. You see, my children, your everyday life in this day and time is a result, a slow accumulating result of a purposeful divided village, a once secure village divided by strangers from faraway lands who came and broke up the village. Now you wonder, how did these strangers break up so many villages, and exactly who are these strangers? Well, now, child, listen me closely. You see, my children, when the strangers broke up the village, the elders of the village that schooled the village people were removed first by the strangers. Confusion set in among the village people. The strangers divided the village people by sending them to faraway lands across the Atlantic Ocean, far away from the village and its protections. Now look up to the sky. Look up. Can you see that cloud right there? Can you grab the sky on the other side of that cloud? That is how the village people felt, being taken away, far away from their villages. In these faraway lands where the strangers lived, they divided the families repeatedly by dividing them and selling them to a stranger's highest bid. And over the years, the village people lost their identities. Separated from one another, the village people were enslaved, brutalized, and many were destroyed by these strangers. They no longer knew who they were. The strangers gave them different names and forced them into hard labor. The knowledgeable village people shared their story with other village people for a while in these faraway lands. But when the strangers discovered these storytellers, the strangers destroyed them. Soon the village people stopped telling their stories, and most forgot about the village. Confusion turned to anger, for the village people divided had no identity among the brutal strangers in these faraway lands. You see, my children, when you don't know who you are, and you live among a strange people who mean you harm, confusion slowly builds in your mind, and over the years, confusion turns to anger. And you can't possibly know the core of this anger, for the core has been deeply buried and kept well hidden by the strangers, a convenience to keep you under control. Now, the strangers want to know how your group would like to be addressed, since they've taken away your village identity and convinced you that you alone hold the power to choose your new identity. Negroes, blacks, African Americans. Sounds familiar? Why are you choosing a new identity when you were born with a village identity? The story of the village was well hidden over the years and replaced by his story, the strangers. For it is his story the village people now live in these faraway lands they come to call home, with people that do not reflect the village, who abuse and misuse them. Life for the village people in these faraway lands becomes a ball of confusion. The village people continue to birth their children. They even birth the strangers' children, all for the strangers' profit, that is. The village people in the new lands are forced to raise their children through fear, hunger, and abuse by these strangers, and they eventually forget all the knowledge, lessons, and existence of the village because the strangers came along and they broke up the village. Now I want you to think about this. Think about why you are angry and where the core of your anger comes from. Think, what does your anger have to do with these strangers that broke up the village in that far away land called Africa? Well, it's time for you to know your true identity, who you are and where you come from. For it is then and only then that your anger can begin to dissipate. Your existing path is linked from a village in this faraway land called Africa, where there were many villages. People of villages relied and depended upon one another for their existence. For each village member held a unique special position through training and lessons. And every village family member worked together toward keeping the village functional, fed, safe, and strong. So a child's lesson can be whole from many angles and designs, where punishment is defined by repeating a lesson learned and explaining the purpose of the lesson, should you forget, not by a beating. Therefore, it takes a village to raise a child. Now it is time for you to replace your anger with a strategic plan to recapture the village in your current existence. It is up to you, my children, to begin to rebuild the village wherever you now live. My children, continue to repeat this story I told you to all your family members and friends. Tell them to repeat this story to all their family members, for it is now up to each of us to become storytellers. And never forget who we are. For it is then, and only then, through this knowledge and understanding of who we are, we shall replace the destructive path of anger and rebuild the village. Thank you.
Woo, 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 woo.